Okay, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our second webinar this year, Level Up, the Next Generation of AV Technology Management. We're very excited you were able to join us today, and we hope you'll come back for our next webinar on June 16th. There we'll discuss the idea of program management, single source of truth, to improve the way AV is delivered and relationships are managed when AV resources are considered as a cohesive AV program rather than individual separate projects. If this sounds interesting to you, keep an eye out for an email following our webinar today. That'll include the link to register for the next webinar, as well as a satisfaction survey that would appreciate participation in. Also, keep an eye out for our upcoming 3-day bootcamp, Technology Management 101, where we'll dive deeper into the 4 core phases of our technology management framework and help arm you with tools you can use to elevate your technology strategy in the next generation of AV technology management. For more information, like, follow, and subscribe our social media channels, the links for which you can find in the chat. Some quick housekeeping. We'll be using the Q&A for questions today, so feel free to submit your questions there and upvote any questions you'd like us to answer. All right, so let's move on to the topic of today's webinar. Today, we will be talking about AV technology management. I'm very excited for this topic as it will lay much of the groundwork for our upcoming webinars and this year's bootcamp. It's also one of those terms that gets thrown around a whole bunch, AV technology management. And I've seen high-level definitions at AQAV and AVIX, but it's still kind of nebulous. I can't remember seeing a job description or list of responsibilities for AV technology managers. So before we get into it, what is it that you'd say that you do here? And I mean no offense with this slide. We know and appreciate that technology managers are some of the hardest workers out there. However, especially in AV, it's hard to find consensus on what the job function of an AV technology manager is. And even if we could find consensus on what we should be doing, I think we'd be hard-pressed to find AV technology managers who have the time and resources to cover all those bases. A lot of the job is being reactive and putting out AV fires. So let's take a moment to talk about some of the responsibilities of AV technology managers. As we know, AV is mission critical to business at this point. It has to work for our users to conduct business. Let's take a minute to review roles and responsibilities of AV technology managers. These include managing relationships with internal team members as well as external vendors, staying on top of technology trends and how they can improve the experience for your users, maintaining and managing a catalog of system solutions for businesses. If we allow everything to be bespoke, it's not supportable. Deploy the technology effectively, sometimes around the world with multiple vendors, and do so consistently. Enforce architecture policies to make sure the systems deployed are supportable. Manage the systems once they are deployed. Assure there is a service plan in place to support rooms. Identify potential challenges and risks before they become issues. Collect data on room technology usage to confirm needs are being met. Remote monitoring and management to keep the rooms in operation as proactively as possible. Make sure your users are properly trained in system use and collaboration etiquette and know where they can get information. Clearly, the list is huge. And that's why many technology managers partner with AV service providers to better meet the needs of their users from a proactive stance rather than purely reactive. Many of the technology managers we work with follow a linear path of project management technology. A strategy is devised. It provides a framework for the design. Systems are deployed and supported. This is a typical method of managing AV systems. And it works well for a particular effort. However, it lacks a process to assure a supportable, consistent AV program. A potential result of this approach is many different versions of AV solutions that may or may not resemble each other. From a solutions perspective, it'll work. From a user, support, and consistency perspective, operational complexity may spiral out of control. In other words, the systems may all work very well individually. However, the user interfaces may not be completely consistent, audio levels may vary drastically around the floor, and several different cloud portals may be required to support all the different solutions. All these nuances result in frustrated users as well as operators, but it doesn't have to be like that. The most successful and forward-thinking technology managers take a different approach to AV technology management, with more of a cyclical and interactive relationship between the different responsibilities. That is, the strategy should both drive and be driven by an intelligent and deliberate approach to how AV assets are designed, deployed, and supported. But the most important thing here is to close the loop between the support and design phases. So many important lessons are lost in the field and never make it back to the design team. By closing that loop, we improve the design and strategy for our AV program and therefore continuously improve the experience for our users. Imagine that, prioritizing and carving out time to strategize about improving AV solutions rather than always reacting. It may be difficult because strategizing lacks the urgency of AV fire drills, but Benjamin Franklin said it best: if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Spending time now on AV strategy will prevent untold fire drills in the future. As we discussed, typical project-based AV is linear: design, deploy, and finally support. There is little looping back. The projects are completed, systems are turned over, but there is not enough emphasis placed on after-action meetings and documenting lessons learned. Program-based AV is cyclical, with constant feedback to the overall strategy from all the different phases of technology management. Solutions are designed, the designs are deployed, and then supported. But information from the support phase is fed back into the design phase, and information from all three phases are fed into the strategy, making sure the user's needs are being met and leveraging ideas from the implementation team for continuous improvement. Things can always be done better, cheaper, and/or easier. The job of next generation technology managers is never done, but it can be performed with way less headaches. And that's what we'll be discussing today. But before we get into our panel discussion, I'd like to take a few moments to get some feedback from the group with a few poll questions. So please look on your screens for the first poll question. Out of the 4 pillars of technology management, where do you currently spend most of your time? Good. People are coming in. I see a lot of support going on. A few deployment. That's great. Interesting. Very good. So it's a nice mix. I will end the polls. I see about 20% strategy, 20% design, 20% deploy, but 40% support. So the follow-up question, I'll share these results. Okay. And the follow-up question I have is, out of the 4 pillars of technology management, where would you like to spend more time? Excellent. So I am seeing a lot of strategy, a few deploy, a few support. Perfect. That's actually what we were hoping for, and that's what our discussion is going to touch on. So this should be a very interesting discussion. I'll share the results here. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So without further ado, that is very important feedback. We appreciate your participation. And now I will introduce our esteemed panelist for today. Jeremy Elsesser is the president of Level 3 Audiovisual, AQAV board member, PSNI Global Alliance board member, and recipient of the AVIX Educator of the Year Award in 2019. His favorite food is broccoli. Jeff Bethke, vice president of engineering, commercial integrator, 40 Under 40 award recipient, frequent industry committee member, and an avid Etsy hobbyist. And finally, Fred Laux, Director of Technology and Innovation, our resident enterprise collaboration technology expert. He is known to simply bite into string cheese sticks. My name is Jim Maltese, Vice President of Quality Standards. My favorite animals are otters, and I'll be your moderator for the discussion. So Fred, let's start with you. Strategy, it's such a nebulous word, right? What are the most important, impactful things to strategize about when it comes to AV solutions for an organization?
Yeah, well, I'll start by speak from my own personal experience as an AV technology manager for a global enterprise. So I spent some time in that space, and this may vary a bit from your experience and based on the structure of your org, how many team members you have. But the biggest thing that I thought was valuable and really changed the approach that I took was we really elevated my role. And what I mean by that is I had to kind of move outside of being, the tech manager in IT for AV and focusing more on that persona of the AV architect, the evangelist and strategist, right? So it was much more ownership that kind of came along with that, and much more of a strategic focus. And it really became a lot about relationships. That kind of became the core theme. So, rather than being sort of a very technology first and specification first and support first sort of team and organization, we became a very line of business first oriented organization, and a very partnerships focused organization. So, some of the main partners that we had to work with, IT, I think, is a really obvious one. Usually a member of an IT team, especially in a large organization. But building bridges within IT, within networking, within security, data center, compute, any of those spaces, in particular within field services, and starting to build relationships in the field services teams for, tier 2 support out, wherever your sites may be. It was a huge part of our strategy. Finance and procurement, tons and tons of strategy, and being heavily involved, building relationships and contacts within those organizations, especially as we get into a bit more of this sort of program approach, and we dive even further into this holistic AV strategy. Finance is a huge partner and can't really do it without them. As a matter of fact, they'll like a lot of what I built and what we're kind of talking about here and evangelizing here. Facilities and sometimes maybe real estate, oftentimes are two different organizations. So, who's kind of choosing where our new sites are going to be and what those projects are going to look like, and also then who's actually dealing with physical maintenance and things like that of those spaces, after they're installed. Super important to have in particular with real estate, with whoever is kind of doing that forward look, to help them with budgeting and estimates early on. I mean, before this is even an approved budget, before it's even a thing that goes in front of executive leadership, those teams often need square footage estimates for what kind of pricing might be. And you're the best person to do that, right? Especially when you've got standards, better than anybody else what that AV is going to cost, generally speaking. So huge benefit there. Obviously, the AV organization itself, and I mean that kind of in leadership tiers and structures, especially if you have a large team, really important to have as much cohesion there, in particular with leadership. And speaking of leadership, going beyond your own organizational leadership, right, and being able to represent the audiovisual program and solution set to line of business. And that is really the biggest strategy, element of this relationships piece. You have to go learn and meet line of business. That's what I did. It worked incredibly well. We got to know the line of business. I got to know, organizational leaders in R&D and in operations and in product and all over the place. And it made such a huge difference, because what happens then is you get to actually know the people, the leaders, right? These are the people that end up reporting issues to you later, right? But beyond that, you also get insight into their workflows, right? What are the little idiosyncratic things that they do as an organization that are valuable to them as a team? Because as the first sort of pillar, right, beyond strategy, you get into design. If you don't know these people really well and know how they use the systems and know what they love about them, especially, and also really know what they hate about them, if you don't have that context, you end up creating kind of unintentional friction when you do inevitably release standards and do these deployments, and it all ends up as a mismatch of alignment, right? The systems go in, and instead of creating really great positive foundations and relationships, you end up with disappointment, frustration, passive aggression, all sorts of fun things that are outright aggression, depending on your organization. I mean, all those things kind of flow forth. So for me, it all came back to relationships. Go above just being a tech person and be the owner, right? Be the president and CEO of your own little company and go evangelize what you're doing out into the organization and own it. Even if you only own a portion of it, right? Do that for your portion, right? Do that for the deployment phase, or do that for design, and encourage this. It goes so far. Another thing on that elevation of role is try to break the one-off project cycle, get to a big program overview strategy, right? Get to the big picture of, not this project in this state or this project in this county or whatever it might be, but what are we doing everywhere? And how do I own that? How do I maintain that all of these things are complying with my standards, are everything that I want it to be? Once you take that whole life cycle, spec, UX, deployment, support, lifecycle, patching, vendor and partner relationship management, feature development, data analytics, right? You can take ownership of that entire suite, and then that's what you get to architect, right? You get to say, this is how it's supposed to work. That was a huge opportunity, a huge possibility within the role that I got to play. It was extremely successful and difficult to start. That was the big thing. We had a big uphill battle in changing hearts and minds and helping everybody kind of see the way that it might work. And once it did, it worked amazingly. So, aside from those two items, I guess I would say, kind of on that same sort of topic, right? Bring the three main pillars under that one vision, right? So having a strategy for design or for deployment or for support, those are really beneficial to have a strategy for each, but all together as a single strategy, there's sort of this exponential effect. I like to call it like the program waterfall, right? Effort towards design has a cascading effect in deployment, and effort into deployment has a cascading effect into support, et cetera. So there's a ton of value in putting your time in early in design and architecture, okay? It has a huge amount of impact up front, and that's really focused, needs assessment is huge. And then standards packages, budgeting tools, architectural presentations to introduce concepts to users, right? Everything that happens up front will cascade into the next phase. And that flows right into deployment, right? Unifying projects, single source of truth, consolidating things like budgeting, quoting, drafting, programming, all that stuff into sort of one team, one org for all projects, which my colleague Jeremy will get into in a little bit in more detail, but there's some really incredible power and efficiency that comes from that. And then, how do you deal with projects across multiple geos and things like that, and kind of bring that all under one banner. And then on support, right? Single support team. Single tier, a 4-tiered support structure, very typical in IT, more rare in AV. How do we unify with IT in that space and help bridge resources and share a load and present a really consistent support experience to our users? So that's, all three parts of the pillars of AV kind of fall into the same cohesive strategy. There's a ton of cascading benefit. And then lastly, I guess I would say, there are all kinds of sizes of audiovisual teams, right? And some are one person who isn't even supposed to be here, right? And some are, 5, 10, 12, 15, and even more, depending on the organization. And it might surprise you, right? I've personally spent time with large organizations that had very small team, at least at first, and we had to scale it up. I've spent time with other organizations that had huge AV teams, were really well staffed and had lots of features there. So the other piece I guess I would say on that is, if you don't have the resources internally, outsource them. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go get a bunch of headcount and hire. While that's really good if you can, it doesn't make sense for every company. It doesn't make sense for every role. So things like design or drafting or programming, right? Those are great opportunities. If you don't have the resources, find a partner who does, right? Who does, and bring that into your set of skills and sort of bring them into your organization as extended team. Same with program management, project management, install, commissioning, right? You don't have those resources, find a partner who does, bring them in and work with them. And then lastly, the same thing on support, right? Tier 1 through 4, lots of great resources out there for outsourced IT support, and they train well, and it's a well-known process and a well-known model for IT tiered support. So lots of great resources out there. Same thing for monitoring or remote access or even change management. So, again, summarizing there, if you don't have the resources, there are lots of really great partners out there. Find one who wants to embed themselves into your organization and expand your team that way, through more of an OpEx model rather than needing necessarily to staff up on headcount. Again, if you can do headcount, do it. It is always, a wonderful thing to be able to bring a team together, right? I've found successfully you can bring a team together even without necessarily needing to hire by bringing, outsourced contract resources into the organization as an extension of the team. So those would be the big emphasis points, I'd say.
Fred, you hit on something that I really wanted to touch on because I appreciated that you said it. And in the large list of topics, you threw passion in there, because boy, do you need passion to jump into the fire that can be technology management. And, never having been an AV technology manager, so to speak, I come from IT technology management way back in the day. And like we saw with the polls, depending on where you're at, where your organization is at, and the maturity of the program kind of dictates where you spend most of your time. You kind of talked about like the efforts that you put towards building relationships that maybe don't seem top of mind from a technology perspective, but it's so interesting how, in my experience, the technology managers that I've worked for and worked with over the years and partnered with, the ones that are able to move the fastest are the ones that have the buy-in from business leadership and have taken the time to build those relationships in the ancillary departments that really support all the various, logistics and procedures and processes. I mean, it's a cross-departmental effort to successfully deploy, manage, support technology. So I guess I just had a question for you based on the polls and everybody's different percentages. When you were a technology manager, I imagine you didn't get to spend 100% of your time in the strategy mode, because there's also day-to-day operations, right? So how do you slice that up, or how do you create the balance and still, accomplish the bigger mission that we're speaking to here?
Yeah, so a lot of this comes down to the slow down to speed up mentality. So when I started on the very earliest parts of my role within one of the enterprises I worked for, my role was very much like it was firefighting, right? There was that support role, it was executive firefighting, it was escalations and things like that, and I spent most of my time in reactive mode. But that didn't stop new projects from coming up, and that didn't stop the need. It's a cascading effect, right? So I'm busy with these escalations, trying to fix support issues, trying to solve problems that all stemmed from bad deployment, bad architecture, right? All of these problems kind of stem from and bad partnerships, unfortunately. And so all of this stuff kind of stemmed from from us not putting in the work in the first place. And so I realized pretty early on when I was trying to get a spec out for a new headquarters, and I realized pretty early on, I was like, there's no way that I'm going to be successful with this organization being the owner of this and not taking the time and putting the concerted effort into focusing on this more strategically. This isn't going to work. I'm going to fail. I'm going to look bad. I'm going to make people mad at me personally. And I don't want to do that. Just none of us do. Right. So I had the luxury of having really supportive leadership. They listened to reason. They did not agree with me all the time, but they listened to reason. And I brought them a kind of a harebrained idea of, I can't do this by myself. We don't have a headcount to hire. We need partnerships, and we need to start outsourcing the very, very time consuming things like drafting and standards, right? The more less strategic, more tactical things, project drafting, right? Contractor management, stuff like that. We had take it out of our organization. And the cascading effect, and I have more comments on this as we go today too. The cascading effect is massive, right? It's junk in, junk out. When we took the time to get the strategy and the deployment stuff right, we had easily supportable systems, and there were fewer fires, and there were fewer issues, and the issues were consistent. So we know when we solved an issue in one place that it was generally the same as the other. So I think it was a slow down to speed up thing. Coming back to my original answer, I had to break out of that cycle and kind of come back around to, let's get a strategy, let's take it to executive leadership, let's change this, because otherwise I'm just going to be another, I'm going to be burnt out in just a short amount of time, and I'm not going to be able to fix this. So we have to start now.
You took it out of my mouth. That is one of my favorite statements, to slow down to speed up. Brad says it all the time. So true here.
And I'm always impressed as an engineer. I don't spend as much time as I should on relationships, but just building that trust is so key, not only in getting your point across, but it helps in time management too, when you are not constantly justifying yourself. I think that's a huge part of that strategy.
Yeah, and right on that note there, Jim, so much of it came down to when we got to meet like the chiefs of staff for executive leadership throughout the company, right? And we worked with them to say, here's how our standards work to fit your workflows. How do we need to change our standards to fit your workflows? Like, what do we need to do to kind of meet in the middle and get a good working solution? Do we need to develop new standards? Is it just a misunderstanding? When we did that up front, built those relationships with chiefs of staff, we found executive approvals went faster. There was buy-in. When there was an issue, it wasn't the, what did IT do here? It was, no, we agreed to this, maybe we misunderstood or whatever it was, right? And even to the point of like getting shout outs, I can't say how infrequent it is for the AV team in conference rooms to be like, our AV team is the most amazing AV team, especially in big organizations. I've found it just can be a hard crowd. And so it's really incredible to be like the rock stars of the show. They're like, yeah, we made the thing that, our CEO got to use to introduce a new global site, and it was exciting. And they met our contractors and they loved them. And we got a, message of recognition and, that kind of stuff. So it totally changed our approach.
I love that. All right. But let's move on to design. So Jeff, let's talk more about design. In a project-based approach to technology management, there is a high risk of constantly reinventing the wheel for every project cycle. Program-based technology management takes a different approach. We've talked a lot about standards and reference architecture, but what are some of the benefits of spending all that time up front to get a finite catalog of rooms?
Yeah, so, the benefits, it's all based on consistency, right? And it starts and ends with consistency, and it saves time and money. So these are the massive benefits, is just a ridiculous new level of efficiency than we're used to. I think our industry would probably be near the top of any list of industries that loves to like custom design very similar solutions over and over again with very minor, customizations and tweaks. And, this idea of building your reference architecture and, your design documentation based on a strategy, right? As Fred was discussing, that you've developed internally by meeting and interviewing, those lines of business and those other leaders, understanding the requirements, it's huge. So now that you have that buy-in, you design it and you document it, and then you start to apply that design standard. So I want to kind of look at it from like an individual project perspective. So now you have a new project or a new building, or something is coming down the line. Once you have that reference architecture and your design standards are written down, it's going to cascade to all these other people who you're going to work with to go deploy that, that new facility or upgrade an existing facility. So some of the high level stuff, rapid coordination. So is a huge one. So being able to just send a package of reference design documents and directions for how to apply the design, sending that package to architects, electrical contractors, your network team. It speeds up that planning process immensely, because if you don't have that, if it's, hey, we need to know about power and data and all this infrastructure, and if you don't have anything to reference, you're sort of back to that single project deployment strategy, which is where you don't have a design yet. So you've got to go, I don't know, and go hire someone to figure that out. So it just slows down that whole process. But if you're ready to go, you have a standard display wall elevations with power and data. You have standard floor plans with power, data, device locations. You've got screen sizes based on the room size or the people count or the farthest viewer. So you've already done all this work up front. You know exactly which reference design you're going to apply to to that building. So the coordination piece for other trades is a big one. Budgeting, right? How much is this going to cost us? We've got to know now how much money we need to do this. So rapid budgeting. You already have the design, the bill of materials. It's already been worked out, right? So now you can either hand a guide to your real estate team, hey, apply this standard, and here's your budget. Or on the flip side, you get a floor plan. You know exactly how to apply each room type to that floor plan and easily generate your project budget, because you've got a term, the ROM, right? The rough order of magnitude bill of material. So you know what's going to go in there. You've got a quick calculator to get a really close, pretty highly accurate budget in terms of like hardware and software. Your labor element can vary there, but the more control you have over your project management, your engineering, your pre-deployment staging, testing and verification services, right? So Fred talked about finding that one partner that you can lean on and bring into your organization, right? The more accurate you can be, you can control all those costs. You're not going out to the market every single time and getting different pricing. At that point, the on-site, the in-country installation labor is your biggest variable. And then, but for that, well, hey, I've got this really detailed design package that I always have ready to send out. It's got line drawings, it has a BOM, it's got functional narratives and descriptions for what these systems are supposed to do. It has checklists, people can review. So, you've got that ready to go solicit the installation bids, in country within your partner network that you need to rely on. Right. Compare that to a process where your designs are starting from scratch, or you're sending out, kind of loose RFPs with not enough information and trying to deploy it as a single project. I mean, you're talking hours, right, to budget something compared to weeks, right, or months sometimes trying to come up with an accurate number. Rapid deployment, right? So if your strategy is based on the single source of truth for your program, your engineering is 90% done. Your project management services are from the same provider. They know how to go do this already, right? So if you need to roll out lots and lots of rooms in lots of different places, like I said, your drawings are basically done. It's just applying them to the new physical space. You're getting a lot less people up to speed, on your standards. They're just ready to go. It's another project. We're going to go deploy the standards again. So rapid deployment's a big one. Quality, right, is huge. So how do you maintain a consistent user experience? Well, if you've got the standard reference architecture, you know what you're doing. You can easily build testing and verification checkpoints along the way that are highly customized for those rooms. So you know exactly how to test and how to verify to get to the outcomes that you've spent so much time strategizing on and making consistent for your end user. So it's the same, anywhere you go. Another big part of the design is when you standardize and you limit your use of vendors, you get to have some influence on those vendors as well. So, your manufacturers who are providing your hardware, for your solutions, they're really open to negotiate better pricing, right, to become part of that standard reference architecture, right? Because they want to sell hardware and software and services, and they know if you spent this much time upfront building a reference architecture, it's a big ship that's you're not going to steer a different direction every project. It's there, and they know they've got built-in, recurring sales there. So they're definitely going to come to the table if you ask them to with some better pricing than you could go get just shopping in the market. And then you also get a lot of say in product direction sometimes. So, the best manufacturers, they're going to go to their customers and gather feedback and market research into what solutions their customers, want and need. So if you can be that partner because you're standardized on their product and you're deploying it all over the place, you position yourself to help guide that product development, hardware, software, to sort of better suit your needs. And then lastly, just kind of touching on support, because the whole idea is, right, design feeds back down into strategy and over to deployment and back down to strategy and over to support. So it's just supportability. So, limiting operational complexity is big, and it's pretty straightforward in that the more devices that you have, the more different vendors that you have, the more training and experience your support team is going to need to have to support those things. So, right, limiting it, having a focus is just going to let you build that efficient support model moving forward.
Hey, Jeff, there was a couple of things that really struck me here, and two things that I want to share. One, responding to requests for bid is so much better from the integrator's perspective when you have a bill of materials and a specification and reference drawings and maybe even some signal flows. You want to talk about taking the friction out of one of the most frictionful, if that's even a word, we're going to just go with it though, processes, right? Our industry is, to your point, we love to custom design, custom deploy, custom everything, which just leads to more time. So one of the things that's pretty typical, you have a project, you go get a consultant, that consultant helps you put all that documentation together so that you can rapidly deploy this project. What we're suggesting is taking that up even another level, developing your own standards documentation, and then using that to stay ahead of all of those conversations. And, I would argue that in today's market, in today's world, AV world, depending on the vertical market you're playing in, that I think would support anywhere between 80 and 90% of spaces used today where you can truly standardize. And then you focus in on those custom spaces where you really need a custom AV system because it's production quality or it's a very unique space that needs unique custom automation and programming, and you can spend the time, money, and effort where it's due. The other thing I wanted to share is there was a time in my life where I was a commercial electrician, and I remember doing my first few electrical projects that had AV, and I would always wonder why the AV symbology was never on the electrical drawings, right? Here I'd have these electrical drawings and I would be installing all my stuff, and inevitably here would come the AV contractor with this whole new drawing that nobody's ever seen before, because it happened after the construction drawings were already completed by the architect, right? So just another common thing in our industry is, where does the AV team come in when it comes to helping develop the design? Design development, as it were, is the phase from a construction standpoint where there's that opportunity to get that information in. One of the things I personally love the most about having a well-defined standard that has 95 to almost 100% of the infrastructure needs for those standards-based rooms, as a technology manager, you get to hand a package over to the architect and the early design team before they've even completed their floor plan and say, here's everything you're going to need from a data and an electrical standpoint. A lot of times that's not considered in the overall ROI because that doesn't come out of the AV technology capital budget. That comes out of the construction budget. So now as a technology manager, not only are you able to deploy more rapidly with more accurate information, you're helping other team members within your organization save money and provide accurate budgets way upstream in the process. And you know what happens? The symbols for the AV infrastructure make it on the construction drawings and efficiency is had. It's amazing.
Perfect. Well, but let's roll with that, Jeremy. So we've done our homework. We've got complete drawings. We've got reference architecture, and now, like you said, it's time to deploy the rooms, maybe on a global scale. And this can be daunting and frustrating because you want to provide consistent experiences for your users everywhere around the world. How can we accomplish that at scale with so many different users, integrators, electricians, and design team members?
Whew,
Yeah.
that's the big question, Jim. That's a big one, you know. And before I answer how do we maybe guarantee consistency or an outcome, let's talk about how you might deliver on that kind of a scale. And this is where I have to do a shout out to PS&I. PS&I is a global alliance of vetted integrators all around the world that help global clients deliver, deploy these types of systems consistently everywhere. Now, before we give all the credit to PS&I, there's that consistency piece. And it's worth talking about the fact that standards are different from country to country. Teams are different. People install things differently. You might cable something differently. There's going to be there's different power grids and power systems in these countries. There's all these variables. And as you put it, the human variables, all the different team members. It's great when you can have a ninja team of 6 people that you can send all over the world to do the same task because, you know, they learn it very quickly and they deliver on that task over and over again. That's not a reality for most global clients. And there's not a single firm in the world, AV integrator, IT MSP, AV MSP, that has offices and sites in every place that a client has an office and a site in. So we're seeing more of a partnering conversation today than we've ever seen in the past. Clients are looking for these types of standard outcomes and standardized experiences and realizing that it's very difficult to get that through a single point of contact without a different approach. That different approach comes from program management, third-party testing and verification, and that's where we're headed. So you asked the big question, how do I, at scale, guarantee consistency? And for me, that's a quality management conversation. And I have, you know, a lot of experience with this personally. We use AV9000. AV9000 is an auditable standard that assures that we are delivering the outcomes that we promise to deliver up front. You know, you've heard Jeff and Fred talk about the necessity of the strategic planning phase of any AV program within any firm. The time, the effort spent during the strategy and design phases play right into how we deploy, and more importantly, how we verify that we deployed what we said we were going to deploy, and connect it all the way back to the business outcomes that were discussed and aligned upon during the strategy phase. AV9000 is an incredible foundation or bedrock, if you will, for that process. I would say that it's just the beginning. You also have to take the time to build goal and alignment specific testing and verification metrics that you can measure to ensure that these systems are actually delivering not only on the performance specifications of the audio and video system and ensuring that we can be seen, heard, and all of those wonderful things that we love in the AV industry, but that's a given. Now it's about connecting those things back to the strategic goals the business is trying to accomplish. The only way we've been able to manage that is through quality management services, where we have different integrators in different countries installing different systems with standards that we've spoken to. That helps cut quite a bit of that out. At least we're not trying to rethink the design every single project. we can't deploy in every single city, every single state, every single country as our own teams. We have to rely on local partners, which is in the best interest of the client anyway. And so how do we guarantee? We apply the quality management checklists. We apply our process to the end of every single project. And that is the metric that we use that aligns all the way back to design and all the way back to strategy and is bought in across the business to ensure that when we say this room is done, it's actually 100% done in production and moving forward.
But Jeremy, so if I'm like one of those 1 or 2 person AV technology management teams, and I've got all these potentially different projects and initiatives going on around the world, how do I keep my arms around all of that, as well as provide meaningful information back up to leadership as a 1 or 2 person team? I think you might be muted.
Okay, well, it was the #1 quote in 2020, and we're starting strong in 2021 with this being the #1 quote. So now I'm unmuted and we can proceed. The question was a good one, and the answer is program management. Fred led off with this early on, and I think it's worth revisiting that. How big is your team? How big is your firm? How many resources do you have? How much of it do you want to take on versus how much do you need to outsource? You know, Fred told a great story in that there was a lot of strategy that needed to take place while still designing, deploying, and supporting the systems that were already active within the environment. Okay, well, Fred's role was to really focus in on strategy. So he looked at outsourcing the deployment, the support, the design side of it, and helping build those standards to help create the initiative that he was trying to accomplish. Other organizations are going to be in very different situations. Some of them might have their own program managers already. Some of them might not be thinking from a program management perspective because maybe they only have a couple of sites or they only have a few rooms, right? So the answer to your question in this example that we've been talking about, a potentially large global multi-site, multi-vendor situation, that just speaks to the complexity that it can get to very quickly at scale. And the answer to that is program management. And program management, for those aren't aware, is taking project management up a layer, right? Project management is all about getting into the details and managing the outcome of individual projects, individual initiatives with individual specific outcomes. Program management is all about aligning every single one of those project outcomes back to those business goals and outcomes that were discussed during the strategy phase. And, you know, I keep speaking of strategy as a phase, but really it's iterative. It's always happening, and it's an ongoing conversation, kind of like your graphic showed in the PowerPoint. But that program management level now is a single conduit for all of these projects, all of these initiatives, everything going on from a strategy, business alignment perspective, design, enterprise architecture, reference and standard architecture, and iterating on that, the deployment side and what the current status is, which we all know can be a significant portion of the pie, as well as what's going on from a support perspective, bringing all of that high-level information back to leadership so that strategic decisions can be made, and thus the cycle begins again. So it's really putting some infrastructure and resources in place to be able to ensure that every initiative, every project is being tied back to strategic business outcomes and delivering on what the leadership aligned with the team in the first place. Now, the last thing you asked was, what if I don't have that type of resource? And that's where organizations like ours can step in and assist. We can provide any of these types of services as a service, a managed service for program management, where depending on the scale of your program and your organization, can require either a dedicated program manager or potentially just a portion of hours to be able to bring that layer to the program. You know, I think Fred spoke about it best. So often we spend our time on the deployments of individual projects and supporting reactively and designing as individual projects. There's a huge opportunity for everyone to be able to bring it back a level and look at it as a holistic life cycle and find opportunities for additional efficiency and gain that might not be available or readily visible within the individual project level.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, there is an incredible amount of stuff going on, and I can't think of anything more widespread than support. So let's talk about this last phase. In my opinion, this is the most overlooked aspect of technology management by us, by AV service providers, which is very unfortunate because this is where actual technology managers spend most of their time. And as our poll showed, about 40% of the technology managers here spend most of their time in that support phase. So Fred, what makes a system supportable and supported?
Wow. So a lot of things, but pretty much everything we just talked about. So at its core, it all comes down to quality of the system and the resources available to support the system, right? So let's break that down. Quality is what we've been talking about. It's the net benefit of all of this other stuff. And quality, generally kind of gets bucketed into, does it test well, right? Does it meet the specifications? But I mean it a little more broadly than that, though that specific meaning is valuable here. Quality as in, is it meeting the needs of the business in a consistent way? Is it worth the money? And so how do we get there, right? It flows from design and deployment. So when your customers are bought into the vision and you've articulated that vision into good standards and consistent documents, and you've deployed that through a solid and performant program model, and you've verified the systems against the specs, and you've trained your users and you've gone through this process, right? And now you have an awesome foundation to start enabling support with some new resources. So like I said earlier, all this stuff comes first, junk in, junk out. And no wonder why there's oftentimes a contentious relationship between systems integrators and technology managers. That often happens because they're the ones who have to clean up the mess when it's not done right? And I was in that position and I was in the exact same boat. And so that's where all the strategy stuff comes from. It has to be a better way. You can't magically fix everything that's out there. And the problem is once you actually start applying, you start applying resources, which you'll have to do, but if you start applying resources to fix things that are just bad, you're going to spend a lot of time and money trying to make it work. And you might have to for some systems and for some sites and for specific circumstances. It's much more valuable if you can to bring it back around, because that's the foundation of a supportable system,
right? Is
the quality of the system. So with that in mind, what do you do after that, right? We've got this great foundation, we've got the quality. We are officially not junk in and thus not junk out. Okay, so what do we do with our not junk? You got to first off, and hugely, break the cycle of user reported break fix. Okay, this is thing number one. You got to break this cycle. And how do you do that? Again, the things we talked about, and we start applying resources. So the core issue is I go to a room or a system and it doesn't work as a business owner, right? Where as a business line of business participant or contributor, I try to use a space and it doesn't work, right? You've just cost the organization money as an AV technology manager and AV team, right? The program has now cost the business money. This is what it's all about, whether it's embarrassment or inefficiency or actually losing a deal or whatever it might be because we were late. However you want to dice it, conference rooms and AV systems in general are expensive when they go wrong. So applying resources, right? A quick one is self-help resources. How do we get self-help resources to the customer? hopefully you design the system in such an intuitive way that much like your, your phone or whatever, right? Nobody has to really teach you how to use it. It just works the way you expect it to work. Moreover, hopefully you've deployed it consistently. And so, okay, well, I know system A, so I know system B, right? The user experience is similar. Still, there are other resources, quick reference guides, video walkthroughs, right? Things like that. And those should absolutely be self-help, right? There's great resources out there for, in-room QR codes or things like that, where you can scan it with your phone, any phone, no app required, right? And get access to, bam, I can hit play on this video. I've got access to these resources, and here's the number for support, right? So that's step 2 is tiered support. Follow the traditional IT models for support. They work, they've been around for a long time, and there's usually shared resources within your organization. So, a tier 1 through 4 approach, right? Generically speaking, tier 1, help desk concierge, right? Maybe be able to fix something, probably going to help get you to the right place. Tier 2 technician level, going to be most of your tickets. They're going to be your case owner, right? That kind of level. Tier 3 engineering. Those are larger issues, things tier 2 can't figure out or don't have the resources for, the permissions for. These are elevated. They're global shared resources oftentimes. Anything that affects dozens or hundreds of systems is going to go to these people. They're going to help deal with change management, right? This is your escalation path. And then tier 4 tends to be your architecture, your design, right? Your line of business. It's when whatever is happening is going to impact the whole program, right? Something has to be spec'd differently, right? That's big, bad stuff, but there's a place where we have to go sometimes. And so it's important to be able to have that place. You can do other really cool things too, like monitoring and building your systems in the design phase with observability in mind so that you have the data, right? You've collected the data. Now you can put it into your enterprise IT monitoring systems. You can start doing ticket generation based on certain detected instances or situations, right? Automatic remediation for basic issues. I'd say one other big piece on what can you do is dedicate someone for escalation management. So don't have a plan for when escalations happen, right? Don't plan to take it all onto yourself, right? And try to have a path, right? A well-defined escalations path. It makes all the difference in the world when you know how that's going to work every single time. Here's the path. Here's how it's going to happen, right? Follow that escalation procedure. All of these things can be, generally speaking, can be outsourced, partnered with other organizations. Great resources there for that. Just watch your SLAs, right? Make sure whatever you're doing is clearly defined. It's not just I'm supporting you, right? It's I'm going to guarantee you a business outcome, right? Not just I got your back, but what's the business outcome? What is my uptime? What is going to be the amount of interruption I'm going to experience, right? Make them commit to it. There's a lot of value in that. It all comes back down to conference room's job is to support the business, nothing else. They're there to support the business. And so everything we do wraps back to that. And at the end of the day, final comment, hopefully when you've done all this right, you get down to the end, now you actually have some data, not just from how the projects went, but now actually some data collection that you can do to say who's using the spaces and how often, what are they doing with them? And, all of those things. How often are they up? How often are they down? How else are you going to measure an SLA, right? You have to have the data because now that can loop back around. And you can take that to the line of business and say, these rooms are used, these ones aren't, and you can take that back to real estate and say, we need you more of these types of systems and not these ones, and to your support teams to put in more processes, et cetera. So it's just huge value add. And that's what all of this future of work and digital transformation stuff is about, is consuming that data. If you don't have it, you can't give it to the business at the end of the day. So that's all I have on that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And in the interest of closing that loop, just like Fred was talking about, let's close the loop now and begin prioritizing AV strategizing. So I'm asking all our participants, if you can, please share in the chat any takeaways from today's discussion that may impact your AV strategy. I know I've got a bunch of notes, but put it in the chat so we can all share some of my notes, some of my takeaways. Prioritizing building trust from leadership, breaking the cycle of break fix. I love that. And I think learning lessons from other industries that can go a really long way. So please feel free to share with your other participants. And while we are doing that, this concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Fred, Jeff, Jeremy, thank you so much for participating in the panel. And that's a wrap. Please keep an eye out for our upcoming webinars and in-person bootcamp. For more information, like, follow, and subscribe to our social channels. The links are already in the chat. Thank you very much.